It's not a bad idea.
So
We're all believers in good schedules and shit, but
both forward.
when you start just splitting hairs 6 weeks, they don't have value to anybody.
So let's see.
They feel the buddy. He's just got what I call the utility infielder guy.
I think I'm sharing this.
Thanks, guy.
The share coming, the share coming through?
They only get.
All right, can I start everyone? All right, cool. All right, thank you guys for attending the meeting today. For those of you in person and online, we got a good attendance online, which is awesome. We usually start off with introductions, so I will go around the room and we'll do some introductions. Matt, do you want to start? We'll go around the table and then we'll finish up over here, please.
Matt Frost, ACM, Big Schedule.
Bill Bonnell, ACM, board member.
John Kirby, retired scheduler.
Jim Krebs, ACM, also retired from AACE.
Jeff Taylor, ACM. Sean Debo, the Chrisman Company, Secretary for the Great Lakes.
Chris Miller, ACM, board member.
Jeff Ostermiller, ACM, board member. Tony Woodrich, ACM.
Don Riley, ACM, board member.
Andrew Grusnick, BMP Associates.
Scott's way in the back. Hey,
Scott Barton, board member, treasurer.
I am Jason Marintet. I'm Jason Marintet, the local president. Work for ACM. We skipped over Chris. Go ahead.
Chris Pascal, I'm a senior project manager with Secretary.
Okay, great. I'm Roger Nelson. I'm with Spire Consulting Group, and let's see. I think we're good. Are we good with the share? Sharing?
Yeah, the share.
Everything good?
Let me just do a couple more announcements. And then
Yeah,
I'll get
go
you-
ahead, yeah.
Okay, cool. All right,
Yeah.
cool. Thank you. Obviously, this is the second time doing this venue. For some people, this is their first time coming here. So any feedback you guys have about how things work with dinner, setup, anything like that, we appreciate the feedback. I think we liked it the first time, and so we might just keep doing it. But any feedback would be appreciated. Also for the online people, we started doing a webinar this time instead of a regular Teams meeting. So I'm hoping that it's user friendly for everyone. But please provide any feedback on how it works for you. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A area. There should be a Q&A area on your on your interface. So Scott is going to be monitoring it, and he'll probably just
Chime in, yeah.
give you the questions.
Sure.
One other announcement from just kind of a national perspective. We do have a new executive director / CEO, Deb Lally, who was doing it for about 3 years, stepped away, I believe, back in June. And so Michael Kobioka, I believe is how you say his name. He started probably a little over a month ago. So new, I don't know, just you can look him up if you want more information on him. There's information on the national website for him. And a couple of announcements section-wise is that we have 3 more meetings to wrap up the year. The next meeting in February is going to be presented by Todd Alderman, who is the president of Daibuku. Our Vice President Andrew is helping set that up, and the topic is still TBD, but it'll be worked out probably the next week or two, and we'll have the flyer out for that. Exciting site visit in March that Sean Debo, our secretary, is setting up. It's a new state psychiatric hospital in Northville. From what he tells me, it's 400 square feet, and it's the fourth.
400,000.
Yeah, 400,000 square feet. 400 square feet would be interesting. It's the fourth psychiatric hospital in the state of Michigan. It's for adults and pediatric, and Sean's the lead scheduler on that, so it'll be interesting to see him help us up with a tour. So I hope everyone can make that. It's been a little while since we had a site visit tour. So, and then we're still working out the topic for April with a couple different ideas, but we'll have that set it out in the next month or so.
Jason, one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just from the announcement that have come out from headquarters, having served on the committee for the last 3 years, nominations are now open for board of directors regional directors and officer positions in the association. I don't know if anybody's active, but having served on that board, it's often difficult to find interested and energetic folks to do that. So if you do have an interest, you can certainly work through the website, or if you want to reach out to me, I can help navigate that process. But that's only going to be open for a bit longer because the election will be a few months away.
Very cool.
Yeah, just to add to that too, absolutely agree. I was the regional director for a while at Region 6, the West Coast. Really recommend it. And it's sort of, your odds aren't that bad. I mean, it's not, not like there's a half a dozen applicants if you're interested. Oftentimes it's just two, maybe three. So, think about it.
Thanks.
All right, well, with that, I'm going to introduce Roger Nelson, who you just heard. He's going to speak about productivity loss and how to track it, different causes of it, how to evaluate it for a claim. So it's going to be very interesting. I'm very excited. For those of you that don't know him, he just recently moved back here. So he's been very involved in the national level for AACE. He's a former director of Region 6, like you just said, and he is the current chair of the Construction Dispute Resolution Committee for AACE. Be very interesting, and welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Good. Actually, I had a kind of a slide on AACE here, just, and talk about it a little bit. But so in general, going to talk about productivity loss and claims a little bit as well. I think, definitely want to get some interaction and some feedback from the folks in the room. I understand a lot of people are very involved in project controls, providing those types of services for owner side, contractor side, and then some Jim and some others done some claims related work. So I'd love to solicit any war stories or from anybody about some of the claims that might have come up throughout your careers. It's great. So just to talk about the committee here a little bit, and some of this is just AAC related, but really want to encourage everybody to get involved on the national level too. The way I started getting involved was submitting papers and getting those and presenting at the conference. And what I tell people with that, particularly kind of more junior folks, is that if you write a paper, it gets accepted to the Connex in June or so every year. It's hard for your boss to say, no, you can't go to Connex to present the paper. So that's kind of my advice for folks who are maybe haven't done it before. Kind of just force the issue. So I encourage that. So from the CDR subcommittee, dispute resolution subcommittee. So it's one of various subcommittees in AACE. It's pretty active. I would say the planning and scheduling might be, I don't know, Jim, is that bigger, equal size? Maybe those are kind of the two big ones.
Yep.
Yeah. And so a lot of content, a lot of papers, the group, members submit and develop. And so what that means, what the committee does basically, I would say the number one thing would be soliciting and reviewing abstracts, and then reviewing papers and getting the content into Connex and then into our AAC's virtual library. If you're interested in kind of I call it kind of the more nerdy, theoretical, technical side, that is, that's something that AACE is very into, and we love papers around all sorts of esoteric topics. As the chairman, I'm on the tech board as well. Although I found out recently I'm a non-voting member, but I get to, so I sit through the meetings, but I don't get to vote. But it's an interest. The tech board is sort of the brain trust of AACE. If some of you aren't as familiar, we had a meeting where we spent 2 days hammering out the kind of how the formatting and the layouts and the fonts and this type of stuff, where to get everybody consistent and they spend a ton of time, everybody volunteers, and a lot of effort there. So the tech board's a really valuable group. And And so other than that, we put on, the CDR committee puts on webinars, national kind of webinars that you might have seen through AACE, outside organizations as well. And we have committee meetings. I'm supposed to put one on. Well, I've been trying to do it more often, but yeah, a few times a year we try to do at least. I have to do it at least once a year, and so I got that. But I'm trying to get more regular meetings scheduled with the board of the committee, and then AAC communities too. And I don't know, maybe I could ask the group: do you guys use, maybe someone on the board, use the communities to communicate amongst each other, or do you kind of just go email, listserv function? I don't know if.
Well, a little bit now. We now have
Yeah.
a website on the national site for our section. So
Mhm.
whoever joins our section as part of a community, now we set an event on there so they get the notification as well. So we're doing it both right now.
Okay.
But,
Well, both.
we haven't really, we could be doing this to get better. We could be doing more discussions on there. Stuff like that.
In fairness, it's not super active. I think a lot of people, I mean, everybody becomes a member, but then you got to have a login. You got to kind of figure it out. That's something I think that the organization needs to sort out a little bit. It doesn't seem to be enough engagement. But anyways, that's a bigger subject. But it is quite a useful tool. We can upload documents. You can do all this stuff. But again, do people get it? Do people see it? I think that's the part we're still figuring out. Okay, so moving on here, let's kind of get into the meat of things here a little bit. I'll talk a little bit about kind of just the fundamentals of claims, and I'll start with that and then kind of come back to that at the end. So, what is a claim? You think of an insurance claim, filing it with your insurance policy. For our purposes and for what we talk about it within our organization, I mean, frankly, it's an unresolved or outstanding change order is often really what we're talking about. And so contractors trying to get recovery for some extra work, and owners doesn't want to pay it. And so that is where most claims come from. It also can be, sometimes contractor might not have developed a lot of claims throughout or change or order requests throughout the project, get to the end and it's way in the red. Our contractors just spent way more than what they've been paid. And so they've got this sort of global claim of, talk about a little bit, but productivity loss, other factors that could have got them in that position. From a dispute resolution perspective and kind of the escalation of disputes, I think this is kind of an interesting graphic. It kind of goes the stepping stairs up a little bit, where how do you resolve disputes? And it's I know that a lot of folks in this room are big on project controls, and so it really it's partnering, it's prevention. I think everybody here probably recognizes that if you have a good relationship from day one between all the parties, that's a prerequisite for a successful project. If it's not good at the beginning, it's not going to get better, and it's just going to get worse. And so it's developing good relationships and processes from the beginning. And if the prevention part doesn't work out, it escalates to negotiations, different ways to resolve disputes with DRB boards, with mediation process, and it just gets more and more time intensive and more expensive for the client. And being involved in dispute resolution is interesting because you get a lot of lessons learned on projects, and it's I think that Jim would probably agree that you want your clients to listen to the advice early on, and it's a lot cheaper for everybody to get that in. And however, particularly like a general contractor clients, where it's they're like, oh, I'm going to pay some consultant to come in to help with risk management or help with project controls or developing processes, change management. They're reluctant to do that sometimes, and I think it's all of our jobs to try to show the value in that. And I think part of that equation is to look at it, if it gets to the end and gets to litigation, it's really expensive. I mean, dispute resolution fees are expensive, and the lawyer's fees, of course, are even more. So, I mean, it's often, well, anyways, I could go on kind of war stories there, right? But a lot of times when we get involved, we're like, why are we involved? Like, what is this? This is not that much money. It's in no one's best interest. And I talk to the litigating attorneys, and they're like, yeah, we tell them it's not in their best. They don't listen to us. And
It's
Go
the
ahead, Jim.
demand on time of the key principles of both combatants, whether it's an owner and a contractor and a sub. You're tying up your most valuable, your most expensive, your most effective people to deal with something that's in the past. When if you're an owner looking at your next project, or a contractor bidding your next project, or working on it, and you're absolutely right about the pure dollars and cents, but the
yeah.
thing that I always shake my head at is the massive loss of time of those cars.
That's a really interesting point. So kind of like, in other words, you might have a project that's done, but the exec who was involved in this project and the senior PM, they're tied up in trying to resolve this dispute, and they're not making money for their company on the next project. Yeah, and that's a really good point. Yeah, on these really troubled projects. I'm on one now where there's nobody around. In other words, it was done so poorly that everybody's left, and it's sort of like, okay, we could subpoena so and so to try to understand what happened on the job, but there's nobody around who was there for the job anymore. Yeah. So, anyways, all right. Talk a little bit about, there's a little slides on time impacts. I'm not going to talk about schedule delay analysis or anything like that in today's presentation, but I know we have a lot of schedulers in the room, and it kind of draw this differentiation. Okay, time impacts are not just delays. Okay, so it's disruptions, suspensions of work, terminations, and things like that, where a contractor can incur a lot of costs without necessarily having it delayed to the overall project. So it's maybe it's a acceleration where they don't get time relief, and so they need to increase the crews, equipment, etc. Various types of disruptions and delays. And so to just sort of differentiate, I think is helpful to look at the delay versus disruption. Okay, so and in AACE we love like the definitions. Okay, so when we say delay, for me anyways, it's impacts the longest path and the completion date or the contractual milestone of the project. So an individual activity, generally I wouldn't refer to it as, I'd be careful with what I say about whether it's delayed, right, unless it was on the critical path. However, I mean, if you have activities off the critical path and they're being disrupted, things are, it can incur a lot of costs, right? And that's what we're really talking about here with disruption. The planned sequence or flow, is not what the contractor had anticipated. And disruptions are, it could be resequencing of activities, as I mentioned, increased labor costs, manpower, power equipment, and things like that to make up for this. And we'll talk a little bit later about kind of different types of disruptions, because there frankly are probably more than you think about. There's a lot of different ways that things cannot go as planned. Okay, so in order to quantify a productivity loss or a disruption, okay, so in terms of a definition, okay, a disruption is an alteration of performance conditions that were reasonably expected at the time of the contract, time of bid, as compared to what was actually encountered. Okay, so a really key concept here is that contractor, when they developed the pricing, they had certain expectations about how the project would go. Now, this could go with subcontractors as well, where worked on some matters where they had a reasonable expectation of sequencing the paving work in a way which was sort of efficient. Okay, and maybe when they got out there, the general contractor said, okay, the paving equipment, you got to go here. Well, we can't work here. We got to jump over to here. Got to jump over there. That type of scenario. So it sort of comes down to, the means and methods of the contractor to performing the work, and whether it's something that could be expected, reasonably expected by a schedule in the contract or industry standard for, I mean, yeah, I'm out here doing my work and I've never worked on a job where I couldn't just, move to the next floor. Like I had to stop, it's just sort of an industry standard type of expectations. The owner has an implied duty not to hinder, interfere, or disrupt the performance. This is an interesting, and this really hits on, I think, the concept of the means and methods. And I don't know if you guys work with owners. I know you do work with owners, but if you work with owners who really try to get their hands in what's going on, and it's a slippery slope a little bit. I've had claims where disputes, rather, situations where at the end of the job, you look back at what happened, and that owner or that owner's rep was telling them how to do the work and making decisions for them about how to execute the project. It's a little dangerous. The contractor might not know what they're doing, but at the end, if it looks like you were the one directing the work, then you've taken on some responsibility if things don't go right. So that's an interesting. Has anybody any experience that kind of thing? You kind of have to be careful. You don't want to overstep that. And so on the flip side, though, the contractor's plan has to be reasonable and right. And so you can't go back later and say, oh, I was going to do this. I was going to finish all this in 2 weeks. And I mean, that's crazy. It's not even possible, right? So it's almost kind of the baseline or as planned versus kind of the as built a little bit. And it's like, okay, did they have a plan that was reasonable to begin with? Okay, so disruption equals lost productivity. This graphic is a bit small here, but kind of to highlight some of the common causes of productivity loss on a project. Okay, out of sequence work, trade stacking, trades on top of each other in commercial buildings and vertical buildings is a common scenario. Cumulative disruption from changes. This is one that is difficult to demonstrate, but the idea here is, okay, I'm a general contractor, I bid this project. This is what the expectation of what the scope was. I finished the job and it's not even the same thing. I mean, there's been so many changes. It's like a different job here. And as a result, I was really inefficient in executing my work. And, that's a reasonable argument to make. And it's hard for owners to swallow that because they paid for the changes, right? They paid for those change orders, but, it was executed in a very inefficient manner because that was not anticipated. Site access, concurrent operations. We see with facilities where they might be trying to do construction in part of a plant, and they're operating on the other part of the plant, and these types of things, and then all of a sudden the stakeholders come into play where, hey, we got to get this factory up and running. You can no longer do work during the day, only at night, and these types of impacts. Extended overtime is an interesting one as well, and there's certain industry studies around this, right? So you got crews who are working, 6 10s or whatever, and then you just stack additional hours, right? And it's kind of the theory of, okay, you can do that for a week or two, but if you're doing overtime for 1 2 3 4 weeks in a row, 60 to 80 hours every week, there's some industry studies that show that there is productivity loss experience there. So you can't just keep throwing money at the problem to try to increase or catch up, if you will, with the production. And that one is it. I guess I just paused because it's a difficult. I think people get it. It's a little bit hard to demonstrate. It's a bit theoretical. A little bit. You sort of say, hey, my guys just weren't getting the production per hour because they've been going 5 weeks in a row. And we've, seen that successfully argued. Loss of productivity around over or undermanning the job. So this was a limit to how many crews you can throw at something, right? And the return starts to diminish. And learning curve is one too, where I talked about the paving contractor being disrupted, and like a paving is a good example because you got this equipment where once it goes, I mean it goes. That's where you make the money once you can keep humming along, right? And it's learning curve of kind of coming out and getting things set up. The first couple of days of work, it's just it's slow, and so there's disruption and lost productivity associated with the ramp up period. So, okay, so when we start to think about the claim, okay, so these are the things that might be occurring on a job. So a contractor is, they finish the job or they're approaching the end of the job. Is the way blown out the hours. Okay, the budget is just completely blown out the door. And it's okay, we're in the situation of, what type of claim can I recover this? What can I do here? So loss of efficiency or inefficiency claims. Generally always submitted by the contractor. I don't know if I could think of an example that an owner would have a claim against the contractor. I don't know. It would be something maybe if they had their own, I don't know if they were performing their own work or something. I'm not quite sure, but it's really, it's developed by the contractor or sub. So they're not achieving their expected labor productivity due to circumstances outside of their control, at least allegedly outside of their control. And these impacts can be a wide variety of events. And this is an interesting or an important thing to bring up, because on a lot of these claims and a lot of these troubled projects, there's all sorts of things didn't quite go right. And it's okay, the drawings weren't the greatest. Maybe the architect had a lot of revisions. And at the same time, the contractor wasn't getting their planned productivity. They, maybe had poor oversight, poor controls of their schedules, whatever the case may be, underperforming subcontractors. The owner maybe had very little CM oversight. They didn't know what was going on in the job. Long story short, on the claim projects on these disputed projects that I typically work on, it's like everything kind of went. It's kind of a perfect storm. And I learned that early on, where I wanted to sort of find the answer, right? So who's to blame for this $10 billion overrun? And, and then you think, okay, whose side am I on? So, we're working for a certain client, we're working for the owner, right? And it's like, okay, the contractor. And I realized it's almost, thankfully, the blame is spread around. And it really, if it's one party's fault, if it was really just the deficient drawings, then I wouldn't be involved later on. If it was straightforward, it would be settled out and it'd be resolved. And it's these messy, nasty things where there might be some lost productivity at the same time, drawing revisions or late changes, but it's, the contractor had never built one of these before, and maybe they just didn't know what they were doing, and it's probably a bit of both. Anyways, that's sort of why I have a job.
I thought that same thing. When am I ever going to get one that's simple? But exactly right, Roger. When it is one single issue, a single site condition, or those you don't see those because they get resolved.
Yeah.
Because if contractors and owners couldn't resolve those things, there would be no good. But the ones when they can't get it over with, if it's beyond personalities, it's generally layers and layers of problems that you have to sort out.
Yeah. Yeah. And trying to slice them up and categorize them separately discreetly is really difficult sometimes. Yeah. It's yeah. Anyways, but that's part of the deal. And so, okay, so I think these slides are the slide's pretty helpful here, where, okay, again, we're looking at a disruption, we're looking at a productivity loss. What are the key parameters? Okay, what was the expected? And so this is the perspective that I would have coming in, or maybe a contractor, or maybe reviewing a contractor's lost productivity claim. You could sort of see what was expected? Details of their bid about what the expectations were and how they were planning to execute their work. And what crew did they have? What was the anticipated productivity of the crew? What do they expect? And is that well defined? Now, sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. Hopefully that's documented, right? Because if you're going to show that they didn't get what they thought, then you got to know what they thought at the beginning. Another key thing that Jim was kind of hitting on too, where is the issue impact isolated to a specific time, or was it kind of a global type of deal, right? So was it a COVID-19 kind of impact? When they started, when the tunneling contractors started excavation, did things go good for a while, and then things slowed down because allegedly the soils changed? Do they have a period of performance that was optimal, that was in line with their expectations? If frankly, it's easier to demonstrate and to support a claim this way if you have a period of unimpacted performance. So where things were great, and then you can say, hey, look, things were good. Here's some data, and if I was humming along at the same rate, I wouldn't have a claim. If I was humming along at this rate, it would have taken this many hours and it would have cost this much, but hey, it actually took this much, and I'm asking for the difference because that's not my fault. What other factors? And this one kind of lends to the credibility of the analyst and the credibility of the claim, where you might say, okay, we had some breakdown here, carve out the costs associated with this because my paver broke down and my crew was standing around and had nothing to do with the owner. That was my own deal, right? So even if it's not a good story on your side, right, identifying what these other factors could be is important. And can you separate them? And this is tough, right? Because you have something where I've had projects with process plants with piping, for instance, and it's okay. They spent, the pipe fitters crews spent twice as many hours. Okay, well, from day one they were pretty much spending more hours. There's a bunch of changes, drawing reissues, other issues going on, weather impacts. It's like how do you carve out issues with the trenching in the yard with a change in the drawings that implemented at the same time, and it's like how do you carve out certain hours for different impacts? Some projects are easier than others, and some, frankly, are kind of subjective, and that is to what Jim was talking about in terms of claims as well. And that's why you might have differing opinions. So the other guy might say something different. And something I learned when I started doing this, at first it was like, well, why can't everybody come to a consensus, right? Why can't we're supposed to be impartial, someone's paying our bills, right? But how come the person working for the owner doesn't get the same answer as me when I work for the contractor, or vice versa? At first, it's a bit unsettling because you think we're engineers, we have code, we have the same procedures. It's sort of what's going on. Well, frankly, what I've learned is it comes down to the reasonableness of approaches and assumptions. On these projects, the records are only so good, and it's a lot of hopefully the opposing expert has an opinion that I don't agree with it, but it's reasonable, right? It's like, okay, he or she sort of assumed that this particular scope of work was driving the project at the time, and it would be a delay. That, hey, this was critical at the time. I think it was this. The records aren't perfect. Okay, yeah, I get why he might say that, and hey, it might be a big difference, right? If it's this versus that. So, and to this point, it's like, okay, well, the weather impacts were a certain aspect. He might say there were 30% of the product. I might say they're 15%. It's like, it's like I respect it. It makes sense, and it's hard to just say that one might be wrong when the other's right. So it's messy. And finally here, the productivity loss looking at is the data available to evaluate it, right? And this is huge. And even sophisticated contractors just don't record this kind of information. I use the example of a tunnel. Tunnel's great because if you're a tunnel boring machine, it's like you have every second of every day, 24 hours of production. We're coming along. Okay, this period of bad soil was here, then it was good soil, and it's like you can really carve that out. I mean, certain things like framing or whatever, they're just not tracking. Drywall. It's like, okay, is someone tracking the square foot of drywall installed per day, per week? I mean, maybe not. And it's really hard you don't have the data. Like I think most of us are engineers, and it'd be great. It's like you have the data, you can come up with some cool models, but it's like, I don't have anything to work with. That's
Every job should be a DVM.
yeah. So,
You find yourself driving like a lot of, like, coming up with your own sort of productivity metrics when you go through this stuff, because regular data just isn't available or recorded.
I would say I mean, the alternative one, you can look at from the cost perspective, kind of an earned value sort of productivity analysis is another way you kind of look at things, right? So, I mean, yeah, you have to try to come up with something.
Have you ever looked at a man hours per percent complete approach?
I haven't used that approach.
I've
Yeah.
defended it. I've not used it. I struggle with it. I'm just curious if you've brought across it.
No, yeah, yeah.
There's a CDR member that uses.
Transition to kind of the methodologies here. And another slide here with kind of more descriptions here, but like we would have with forensic delay analysis, there's sort of different levels of effort versus level of detail required, and accuracy is a little bit arguable, but increased efforts, more accurate potentially. And so starting out, total cost, and like I said, I'll just kind of describe these in a second. Modified total cost, industry study, okay, a measured mile approach, and then kind of a discrete calculation approach. And to kind of talk about what those are. Okay, so modified total cost or total cost approach. This would be, and frankly, we use a total cost approach on almost every job, in the sense that we kind of, if we're looking at the damages, okay, if the contractor is putting forth a claim for a dollar recovery, from the legal, I'm not a lawyer, but from the legal sense, it's sort of like, okay, what's the damage there? And if they're still making money, it's kind of like the claim doesn't, ultimately is not something that is well supported. And you want to see it, if they blow their estimates and potentially make up for their estimates in other ways, you got to take it with a little bit of you got to be a little bit critical of kind of, they're still making money on the job, and so they're just trying to make more money on the job. Is sort of the way you look at it. It's an arguable position to take, but the modified total cost is, okay, contractors spent $10 million on the job. The bid was, and the contract was $8 million. Okay, they overspent $2 million. For the total cost picture, that's kind of their damages. Now the modified position is like, okay, contractor wasn't perfect. They had some issues here. I'm going to carve that out. I'm going to take responsibility for these mistakes, these problems that we had, and to give a little bit more credibility. Okay, so I'm not putting it all on you. I wasn't perfect, but I do need some recovery here because I blew the budget and it wasn't all my fault. Talking about kind of the pluses and minuses here, relatively easy to calculate. Okay, so if you get the job cost report, if it's accurate and they accounted for what they spent on the job, you can figure out, here's what they were paid, what they spent. Cause and effect isn't really there. It's kind of a global thing, right? And we say not favored by courts. It depends kind of how you look at that. there's a lot of made with a modified total cost. I mean, it's definitely out there. With a total cost approach, you kind of have to show that you couldn't really do it any other way. That and you might be in the situation where the records are so bad that you really don't have much else to work with, and that might be an approach you have to take. Okay, industry studies that we hit on, and this is one where it kind of talked about weather, for example, and it's like or overtime. That's a good example of industry studies. There have been studies out there about overtime week after week after week. What's the percentage loss of productivity? And you can look it up, and it's okay. After 4 weeks, it's 12%, and then 15%, and then it increases and gets worse and worse. And it applying those to your labor, right? You can sort of say, okay, of labor this particular week in the project, and then you can carve out a certain number and say, yeah, but some of that was lost productivity because of the increased overtime that Mr. Owner was telling me to do. Okay, and so then you can try to get recovery in that manner. The industry studies, I would say the biggest weakness of an industry study is that it's theoretical, okay, and you're not using data from your project, and you can make arguments there, but the studies are not the greatest. A lot of them are around mechanical and electrical trades, and I've had projects where the opposing expert kind of does some industry studies and applies them to all the labor on the entire job, and it's like it might be a little bit of a stretch. You can apply them pretty quickly. I mean, do kind of quick and dirty, where it might be earlier on through the negotiation process where the owner might agree that, hey, yeah, you had a mud pit on the job and it was this crazy winter and it was not expected, and so you could say, yeah, and I'm going to apply this factor of 30% during this really crappy period of weather. And, you could use that to support your claim. But if it goes down to sort of the litigation and further down the road, it's looked down upon a bit. It's better if you can use some industry project data to show a measured mile where you've got a period where you're performing great and you can show in real data of, but for these things that happened, which the owner did, I would have been humming along and I would have ended up here after this many hours. And that delta is my claim. That's really what that is. Measure mile, people, sort of the gold standard, if you will, of production rates and production periods. There's definitely some nuances around it with kind of ramp up periods, ramp down periods. It requires some pretty good data to do a lot of the time. But it is highly, accepted if you have the data to do it. And then finally, the discrete analysis is where, and this would be the case where maybe the contractors have really good records about what the crews were doing and logging of the hours, right? So to say, they encountered this issue and then the crew was on standby for 2 hours because of this, and maybe there were a number of issues. Then you literally just look at the records, daily reports, look at the job cost report over, and really just add it up. You're like, hey, they got the contaminated soils. Here's all the records of when they were standing by trying to figure out what to do, and here's the pricing for that. Like, I can discreetly say that this crew spent 4 hours standing around because they have a really good record of it, right? So it's that's kind of the gold standard, if you will. Certain types of productivity loss is kind of not possible, but that would be the ideal. Okay, well, let's see. Let's see. How are we doing on time, by the way? So it's top of the hour. We're what, 15 minutes, or what? How are we doing?
10 minutes or so.
2 minutes, so?
About 5 minutes of questions.
Okay, cool. Good. Well, the last section here, so kind of leaving aside the analysis part a little bit, just some general guidelines of claims. I know that the folks in the room here, it sounds like a couple contractor folks, but just kind of a good refresher of what to think about when developing claims. And it's what's the format? We talked a little bit, or I mentioned a little bit before about, is this an initial negotiation? Is this getting more formal? Is this an arbitration? Hey, if we're just trying to lay it out there, we might just spill our guts. Hey, look, here's my job cost for, I spent 10 million, like I'm only getting paid. Help me out here, right? So thinking about what the format of this is, information, how do we substantiate it? I think the audience comes to what that really is important and how detailed the claim backup might be, for example. And whoops. And what's the process? So like I'm sure you guys tell your clients, right? So look at the contract and they all lay out what the claim process. Okay. So it's unresolved changes, how to go about it. There's a usually dictated mediation process that goes on. And then typically in construction, it's arbitration, it's AAA or others is kind of the way it generally goes. Rarely goes to, a trial. And, I think this here is just something to think about where what needs to be in the claim contract, obviously. We have corporate here where sophisticated clients will have formats and documents they use for this type of thing, kind of a company standard for how they might develop claims. Case on rules of evidence, this is kind of more of a legal thing, and that would be, the lawyer would chime in on that. I think this slide is, well, empty buckets, that doesn't tell you much, but filling in these categories. So I wanted to put this up because this is, as a claims consultant, when we see and are engaged on a new project, okay, someone has submitted a recovery or worked with a contractor, they're trying to recover this, right? It's like, where are their damages? Where are their costs? Okay. And these are actually in sort of a sequence here where from easiest to recover to most difficult to recover. And you'll see here, productivity loss at the bottom is frankly one of the most difficult ones to recover. But okay, contract balance, right? Contractor, their final invoice, they haven't been paid for. And it's like, okay, they did the work, retainer, you need to pay, right? Okay, so that's a claim that's relatively straightforward and likely to recover. Changes, a little bit easier to recover. After the fact, if contractor puts forth these sort of, after the fact change or additional work that they did, it's harder to recover than if it's more beneficial to have a list of outstanding change orders that were contemporaneously developed that we can argue for. And those are easier to recover, absolutely, than us consultants coming up with, oh yeah, we need another $2 million for productivity loss. It's like, yeah, it's better if it's in the change order. Delay, time-related costs, a bit more difficult to recover. Similarly, acceleration is a bit hard to demonstrate. And then productivity loss can be very time-intensive. It can be just different approaches, right? You take one approach or one methodology that I talked about. The opposing expert maybe takes a different one. I've had opposing experts use multiple methodologies, and they all sort of got the same answer, which was a little suspect, frankly. And it's like, hey, look, we're all about the same answer, so that means it's a good answer. Okay. They're so different that they frankly shouldn't. So anyways, I think this is a useful thing to talk about with clients to think about, right? Where you might be, if you're doing owner's rep work or something where or a contractor side, for instance, it's get the change requests developed, right? Don't wait until the end and have that revelation that you're in the red and it's like, oh shit, let's develop a claim. Don't let it get there, right?
Roger, if you've got a claim that has a decent amount of those buckets.
Yeah.
I mean, what are your thoughts on contract balance? It's always been my philosophy that if we've got things that are gonna be disputed, change word, salaries, delay, let's get contract balance behind this. It's always been my recommendation to the client, get those resolved.
Yeah.
And it does a couple of things. One, you don't spend a lot of time on it. And two, maybe it shrinks the whole damage picture down so you can get parties to start talking about actually settling. But if you've got this contract balance, it really is just something that needs to get resolved.
Yeah.
It's generally not doesn't require analysts, it just needs to get people out of their way,
Yeah.
and owners will want to hold it punitively.
Right.
So I'm not, it doesn't help the situation.
No,
Your thoughts on that?
I totally agree. It skews it, right? And you want to carve it out. And part of this too is going through this with the client. They might realize that we might parse out the damages and say, hey, look, actually not that much there. Your contract may be no damages for delay or whatever. And, you need to don't focus on the schedule part, or don't pay us to do a delay analysis, because there's not a lot of damages there. And to that point, it's like, okay, if we get the contract balance, okay, put that aside, it's like, what do we have left? And that can drive what negotiations, what's important. And if it's all in productivity loss, you need to have some frank conversations about, okay, look, I can look into this, but this is going to take us a long time to dig through this. We're going to spend a lot of hours. You're going to pay us a couple $100,000 to do this, and it's going to be hard to recover. And so, maybe it should be settled, right? And yeah, this tool of kind of parsing it out is really important for helping clients to make a right decision, make a business decision, right?
Without getting into names, we've got one right now that's got the left right-hand 4 buckets gone. It's only contract balance.
Mm.
And we can't get the owner to decide that they really need to sit. They've got analysts, experts, various trade experts, and it's not that much money, and they need to sit in a room. It's a pure cost claim.
Well, I feel like that
I
would
can't
be
believe
illegal.
what they're doing.
Yeah, that'd be sort of a legal thing. Ultimately, it's like the contractor gave you the value. You have to pay them for it.
Yeah, it's almost like 60, 40, 70, 30, good. Let's
Yeah.
go. But
Yeah. So, okay, I think then the last one here is something that just kind of the 3 pillars of claims, and right, and this is something that I always remind myself of and think about a lot, is you got to have all 3 of these. Okay. The liability entitlement. So you have to develop a claim. What does the contract say? Okay, contaminated soils. What happens when you encounter contaminated soils? Who's responsible for that? It's an owner issue, but nevertheless, what does the contract say, or what does case law or industry standards say about who's responsible for a certain type of issue? Causation, showing the cause and effect, right? So this would be contaminated soils. Can you show that it impacted the work in some way? Can I, as a consultant, demonstrate? Yeah, the crews had to move and they had to do this. Did it actually do something? Right? You have to demonstrate that. And then is there damage? And part of that, okay, contaminated soils came up. Did your crew, could you just move to the other end of the job and continue your work? Or was there really nowhere else to work, and so it really impacted the job? You might not have a lot of damage there. You might not have a lot of delay or productivity loss. And so it's funny because you get into some of these, and you got to have all 3 for claims. And we all have stories of, the liability part, the entitlement's honestly a legal thing a lot of the time. And so sometimes we'll prepare analyses where, assuming that someone was responsible for this thing, here's the causation and here's the cost. Now, I don't have the expertise to say whether they were responsible for that thing. Some other expert might say that, or it might be a legal issue. But if someone decides that they are responsible, here's my answer, right? And we do all this analysis, and then sometimes we lose, the liability part goes away, and then all of our analysis goes away. So that's kind of an interesting scenario as well. But yeah, you got to have all 3. And sometimes to that point about the schedule delay damages, where, the damage part, you might think that there's a lot of money there or something, but, maybe that's a great story you got, Mr. Client, but it didn't really cost you that much money. It is another thing that comes, and you should really be focusing on this. We got a better story over here, or we have a similarly good story, but we can really show the damage is here better than over there. So anyways, these are the kind of things that we think about. So that's that's what I got. And I don't know, any questions or any additional comments?
Any questions on my side?
Mhm.
Got a question about,
Yeah.
so at least in airport construction, a lot of the contracts, assume some of these types of issues, right? So the,
Yeah.
the owner is trying to head it off with like language like, around temporary, suspension of work, basically say it's to be expected or something like that.
Mhm.
But a lot of airport contracts, you can't take exceptions either. So the companies bid them, and you can look at that language and know that that could be problematic. I'm curious if you've seen like, when those do go the full way to litigation, if the case law supports like letter of the law of the contract, or if the kind of concept of like reasonably inferred at bid time.
Yeah.
take precedent, you know?
Yeah, so
Conflict.
yeah, you're saying that maybe the situation of what's a normal disruption or suspension or
Yeah, I mean, you can look at the facts and be like, well, clearly they were impacted.
yeah,
Clearly they couldn't quantify that impact at bid time. From
yeah,
that perspective, it makes sense.
it right.
But the contractor also signed the contract that said you may be suspended, you know, and it's not.
Yeah. I mean, some of that is the entitlement might be weak and some of that falls on the attorney where they think they might be able to still make this argument where I don't have a lot to hang my hat on. And we see that with subcontractor contracts where those are really, it flows downhill, right? With subcontractor, those guys like, man, there isn't much here that I could rely on, right? But yeah, again, I'm not a lawyer, but you kind of make the case of, hey, listen, I did the work. I've worked for subs on an airport job I worked on where they didn't contractually, they didn't have too much there, but it was political. It was, hey, we're a local sub, electrical sub. We did all this work and hey, we got it to you on time. We did the work and we ran over and we want to get recovery. And ultimately they did get some recovery, even though they didn't have a lot to go with in the contract, political decisions and all that kind of stuff. And that's what settlements are for. And so some of these, one of these aspects might be weaker or stronger than the other one. And so it depends, like consultants say.
Oh. Good question.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So, anything else?
Your last slide there, Roger.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, liability entitlement, right, so that's a duty under the contract and one party or the other didn't
Yeah.
perform under that duty, usually reasonably straightforward to present in some fashion. When you get to injury and damage, and I know loss of productivity is difficult.
Yeah.
However, you just talked about all of the methodology, and the recommended practices have all the various methodologies, industry studies, measured mile, delay analysis, even though they're somewhat complex, right? There's all the various procedures in R29, et cetera. But I'm interested because I tried to write some papers on the causation piece.
Okay.
And I always feel like that there's no guidance,
No.
there's no methodology, there's no scale, there's no.
Yeah.
So to the group, I mean, as Roger said,
Yeah.
to perfect a claim, to execute a claim, you have to show that liability. Somebody had to do something they didn't do. And you have to be able to reasonably quantify the damages. But the step that's difficult is you have to be able to demonstrate that liability caused that damage. And there's not formula out there. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
No,
I
I don't know if that was, did you propose a paper? Did you consider?
we presented one basically saying
Yeah.
there ain't no, there's nothing in the record on here about it.
Yeah,
We talked about delay disruption in
Yeah.
productivity loss actually, and some of the pros and cons, and I actually wrote it with an attorney who had a lot of sort of legal precedents of what was accepted and what wasn't, those types of things.
it is a gap. Yeah. I mean, the cause and effect, it's just a tough, it'd be hard to write a general sort of guideline to that other than you just need to, it needs to be reasonable and it is not always a good, this impact could have been caused by this and this, but it's just complicated. Yeah, I agree. People don't think about it that much, and maybe they don't spend as much time on it as maybe part of your point as well. I don't disagree, and some of that might be from documentation.
Right.
Yeah. The project
Yeah, I mean,
record.
my experience is, I was interested in your thoughts, is exactly that. You mentioned it a couple times, and you're telling the story, right?
Yeah.
It's going into the actual project record and be able to present a compelling case of exactly what happened based on the documents in the project and what you can prove, not just what was said.
Yeah.
And be able to tell the story in a logical fashion that a third party trier of fact can believe what it is you have to say.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically it. Yeah. The reason we get involved is really messy and it's complicated, but you know, can you boil it down into something that, okay, yeah, I get that. That makes sense. Like,
Right.
yeah, we had this caused this, and yeah, all right. You know, and that
It's
it's
the
hard.
hardest.
That's the hardest.
Triangle, I think, to build. but-
That's the hardest. Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned before, like sometimes the judges, the arrow traders, they're not necessarily experts in these things, so being
Right.
able to simplify it so that anyone can understand it, or at least some that understands it.
And it's hard for us engineers because we love to make things more complicated and, you know, the super detailed analysis, but then if you can't explain it well, it doesn't do anything for you. That's another thing that took me about 10 years to figure out in this
Right.
profession.
And if you can
Yeah.
do it, and there's others that are better than I, but if you
Yeah.
can come up with a nice graphical presentation of some sort of layout, a
Yeah.
picture, something, I found those to be pretty persuasive sometimes in telling the story.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it's not the most sophisticated of analyses, right? Maybe, oh, they didn't consider this or that or the other. Well, yeah, but it was a compelling story because it made sense and
Right.
you get it. And that's the part that's frustrating part of becoming a trained engineer, getting into some of this stuff is it sometimes it's like, I want to get that exact right answer, but it's kind of not what we're,
Well, and at some point, you've got to take the data and offer an opinion.
Yeah.
And if you're a true engineer and you don't have 14 decimal places of accuracy, we can't jump off that cliff and make that.
so good. All right. Well, thanks. Yeah. Thanks everyone.
Thanks
Cool.
for all the
Yeah,
attendance online.
thanks,
Thank
man.
you, Roger. So I appreciate it. Well, hopefully I'll see you guys next month as well.
Yeah. Thanks. Oh, here's, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, here we go.
Perfect. All right,
Cool.
thank you.
Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, we really appreciate it, Jason. Yeah.
What's that?
Sweet.
You're gonna see that on the website soon?
Yep,
All right.
the LinkedIn side anyway.
What's that? Did they get banned or something?